It began in the winter of 1981, when a routine sweep by a KGB, counterintelligence unit, revealed something that should not have existed on Soviet soil. During a late-night inspection outside a communications hub in Leningrad, an officer found a small metal container hidden inside the insulation of a ventilation shaft. It looked harmless, like a piece of industrial scrap, but inside was a microtransmitter. Unlike anything mass-produced in the USSR, the device operated on a frequency the KGB recognized immediately. It matched the pattern of American short-range intelligence beacons used in European operations. At first, the discovery seemed like an anomaly. Maybe a foreign tourist had dropped it. Maybe it was planted by mistake. But within 48 hours, a second device was found, this time inside a Ministry of Trade facility. Then a third one surfaced in the basement of a textile factory located oddly close to a restricted naval communication line. By the end of the week, the KGB's second chief directorate understood the truth. The CIA had launched a covert mapping operation inside Soviet infrastructure, not to gather random information, not to steal blueprints, but to build a network of silent beacons, small transmitters placed near communication hubs, allowing the CIA to intercept unencrypted bursts of internal traffic from short distances. If fully deployed, the system could expose routine military dispatches, internal planning memos, even low-level command instructions that were never intended to be radioed abroad. The KGB formed a special task group headed by Colonel Yuri Antonov, a methodical officer known for his patience and unnerving ability to predict an opponent's next move. Antonov was convinced the devices were not placed randomly. Someone inside the country was guiding the Americans, someone with access, mobility, and enough authority to move unnoticed. For the CIA, the operation was codenamed Silent Crossing. It had been planned for nearly 2 years and involved a combination of embassy couriers, deep cover field officers, and local assets. On paper, it was simple: plant beacons, activate them one by one, and create a quiet window into Soviet communication routes. If successful, the United States would gain intelligence that previously required satellites, risky agent meetings, or costly intercept missions. But what the CIA did not anticipate was that their most valuable tool, precision, would also become their greatest vulnerability. The beacons were placed with near mathematical symmetry across the region. To an untrained eye, it meant nothing. To Colonel Antonov, it meant everything. Patterns were easier to trace than shadows. Within days, Antonov ordered full surveillance on every Western diplomat who had visited Leningrad in the previous 6 months. He questioned factory managers, inspected maintenance logs, and reviewed guard rotations. On the surface, nothing seemed suspicious. But one detail caught his attention. Several of the facilities where devices were found had been visited by the same Soviet engineer, a quiet, unremarkable man named Pavel Mirov, whose duties technically gave him no reason to be in those locations. Antonov didn't arrest him, not yet. Instead, he did what the KGB often preferred before making a move. He watched. And while he watched, the devices kept appearing. By January, they had found 12. The CIA hadn't miscalculated the KGB. They had underestimated it. Pavel Mirov was 43 years old, married, a father of 2, and by all accounts, the kind of Soviet citizen who blended seamlessly into the rhythm of everyday life. He worked for a state-owned industrial design bureau, never traveled abroad, never missed a day of work, and never expressed any political opinion stronger than mild irritation about shortages of butter. He lived in a gray apartment block like millions of others and spent weekends repairing radios in his kitchen. Nothing about him suggested he would ever come into contact with American intelligence. Yet Antonov noticed the smallest cracks in the facade. Mirov often volunteered for maintenance, trips to facilities outside his department's jurisdiction. He had access to tools capable of dismantling ventilation grills and wall panels, the exact places where transmitters were found. And most importantly, he had once worked at a research institute that specialized in signal interference. The CIA didn't need someone loyal. They needed someone useful. Surveillance began with his routine, his commute, his lunches, his late-night walks around the neighborhood. For 10 days, nothing unusual occurred. He met no foreigners. He made no strange phone calls. He bought groceries, visited his mother, took his children to school. But on the evening of February 3rd, during a mild snowstorm, Mirov took a different route home. Instead of heading toward his apartment building, he walked toward a forgotten side street near the river embankment. Antonov's team followed at a distance. Mirov stopped beside an old kiosk that had been abandoned since the early 70s. He knelt down, brushed snow away from the base, and slid his hand underneath the rotting wooden frame. Seconds later, he pulled out a small object wrapped in waxed cloth. He didn't even open it. He simply concealed it inside his coat and walked away as if nothing happened. The KGB agents didn't intercept him. They wanted to see the full extent of the network before they made a single arrest. Later that night, when Mirov went to sleep, a silent KGB unit entered the alleyway and recovered what he had hidden. It was not a beacon. It was a film capsule, American-made, and inside it was a set of coordinates matching several Soviet communication points. No names, no instructions, only numbers and locations. It was enough to confirm that Pavel Mirov was not acting alone. Someone was feeding him targets. Antonov presented the evidence to his superiors. Their response was immediate. If the CIA system continued to grow, it could compromise regional command lines within months. They demanded action, but Antonov resisted. He argued that arresting Mirov now would reveal the KGB's awareness and trigger the Americans to shut down their operation before the full structure was exposed. What the KGB needed was to force the CIA to continue, to encourage them to make the next move. Only then could they locate the American officer orchestrating everything from the shadows. But time was running out. 2 days later, surveillance reported that Mirov had changed his behavior. He looked anxious at work, avoided conversations, smoked on the balcony long after midnight. Something had spooked him. Perhaps he sensed the tightening noose. Perhaps the CIA warned him. Or perhaps, like many assets before him, the weight of his double life had finally begun to crush him. The turning point came when he skipped work entirely. No explanation, no phone call. He simply vanished for 24 hours. When he finally returned, his hands were shaking, and his coat was missing a button. He refused to speak to co-workers. He didn't go home. He went straight to a public bathhouse, spent 15 minutes inside, and left carrying a towel wrapped strangely thick around something heavy. Antonov received the report and understood immediately he had just made an exchange. Whatever Mirov carried now was not meant for Soviet eyes. The CIA was accelerating the operation, and the cost of stopping it was rising with every passing hour. The bathhouse was one of the oldest in the district, a place where steam-blurred faces and conversations dissolved into echo. It was the perfect location for a handoff. No cameras, no formal security, just a maze of tiled rooms where a foreign agent could enter unnoticed and leave as a different man. Antonov replayed the surveillance reports, noting each detail. The time Mirov arrived, how long he stayed inside, the moment he exited with that oddly heavy towel. Someone had met him in the steam room, someone the KGB hadn't seen. Antonov dispatched a team to check the building's guest registry. As expected, there was nothing useful. Most patrons didn't give real names. Some gave none at all. But one entry stood out. A foreign-sounding surname scribbled in shaky handwriting, attached to a temporary resident permit from the embassy district. The permit number didn't belong to any diplomat, nor to any known foreign visitor. It was a forgery, but a very good one. The kind only an experienced field officer could produce. The CIA had someone on the ground. Meanwhile, Mirov's behavior grew more erratic. He stayed awake late into the night, pacing his apartment, checking the hallway through the peephole, disconnecting his telephone from the wall. His wife had no idea what was happening. She believed he was having a nervous breakdown. In a way, she wasn't wrong. On February 12th, as temperatures dropped below -15, Mirov boarded a tram heading toward the outskirts of the city. A KGB team followed him. He got off near an abandoned refinery and walked through the snow for nearly a kilometer until he reached a rusted pipeline tower. With trembling hands, he climbed halfway up the ladder, removed the towel bundle from his coat, and wedged it into a narrow gap in the structure. He then climbed down, wiped his hands on his coat, and walked away as if he had discarded something shameful. Once he was out of sight, the KGB retrieved the package. Inside the towel was a military-grade signal amplifier, far more sophisticated than the earlier beacons. If installed at the right location, it could extend the CIA's interception capability across half the region. It was clear now, the operation was entering its final stage. Antonov studied the device under a lamp in his office. It was newly manufactured, untouched by dust. More importantly, it wasn't American. The internal components originated from West Germany. That meant the CIA wasn't working alone. They had support from another NATO intelligence service. The stakes were higher than anyone in the KGB initially believed. He also found something else inside the towel. A small slip of paper with a single phrase written in imperfect Russian. Next drop, railway terminal. 14th of February, North Platform. It was a message meant for Mirov from the American officer. Antonov made a decision. He would not arrest Mirov. He would use him. The next drop would be a trap, but not the kind the CIA expected. Mirov would arrive, the American would approach, and the KGB would reveal themselves only long enough to disrupt the exchange. The goal wasn't to capture the CIA operative, it was to force him into a mistake. A larger one that would expose the full scale of silent crossing. But plans involving desperation rarely unfold smoothly. On the morning of February 14th, Mirov woke with a start. He packed a small bag, wrote a letter to his wife, and left it on the kitchen table. It contained only one sentence: "Forgive me, but I can't stand between them anymore." When he arrived at the railway terminal, the sky was heavy with fast-moving clouds. He stood on the north platform, holding nothing, shaking violently, looking around as though expecting death rather than a contact. Antonov watched through. Binoculars from an observation point above the station clock. He saw the moment it happened. A man in a dark wool coat approached Mirov, whispered something in his ear, and handed him a folded newspaper. Antonov didn't need to see the man's face. He recognized the posture, the gait, the deliberate stillness. The CIA officer had finally stepped out of the shadows. In Moscow, there was an unofficial saying whispered in the hallways of Lubyanka. Every American diplomat carries two shadows, one you can see and one you never will. For months, the KGB believed they understood both shadows belonging to David Rimes, a mid-level communications officer at the US Embassy. He was predictable, disciplined, almost painfully ordinary, the kind of man who could vanish into a crowd, simply because there was nothing memorable about him. But in counterintelligence, ordinary is the most dangerous mask of all. The shift began with a pattern so subtle that most surveillance teams would have missed it entirely. Rimes, who normally left the embassy at the same time every evening, began staggering his departures by small increments, 3 minutes one day, 7 the next, then back to his usual time. At first it looked like fatigue or overwork, but a veteran analyst named Sokolov noticed the timing matched, precisely with the appearance of a mysterious radio pulse intercepted near Vnukovo Airport. The signal was short, sharp and nearly inaudible under the noise floor, the kind of message only a purpose-built CIA transmitter could send. The sequence of pulses matched. The style used in burst transmissions, tools for passing intelligence, in less than a second. But the real anomaly wasn't the signal itself. It was the fact that it seemed to originate from a moving source. That meant one thing: a mobile dead drop. For a week, the KGB recorded and cross-referenced every intercepted pulse against embassy traffic. Slowly, mathematically, David Rimes began to stand out. He wasn't just adjusting his schedule, he was syncing it with the radio bursts. Each shift created a tiny gap in surveillance coverage, a blind spot of mere seconds. On their own, these variations meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern that only a trained operative would attempt. Still, the KGB needed more than suspicion. They needed proof. The breakthrough came on a cold, wind-scraped night when Rimes abruptly changed his route home. Instead of turning toward his apartment, he continued straight, deeper into a half-abandoned industrial zone on the outskirts of the city. Surveillance teams followed at a distance, headlights dimmed. Rimes' car rolled to a stop inside a deserted construction yard. The engine cut. No one got out. For nearly 3 minutes, the vehicle sat still. No movement, no light, nothing but the faint crackle of static in the KGB monitoring van. Then took a single pulse, not from the airport this time, but from the exact coordinates of Rimes' car. The team froze. They had him. But the KGB couldn't act yet. If they moved too fast, they risked spooking every CIA contact in Moscow. If they waited too long, they risked losing whatever device Rimes was operating and whatever information he had already transmitted. Colonel Mikhail Voronin, the commanding officer on duty, made the call: "We observe. No interference unless he leaves the perimeter." Minutes stretched into an hour. Rimes eventually restarted his engine and pulled back onto the road, merging into the late-night traffic with the same quiet, unremarkable demeanor he displayed every day. But the KGB had captured the transmission, and after decrypting it, they discovered something far more dangerous than expected. The burst contained no operational intelligence, no troop movements, no classified Soviet documents. Instead, it was a simple sequence of numbers, coordinates. Coordinates leading not to a location inside the USSR, but to an unmarked forest clearing 3 hours west of Moscow. A meeting point. Someone was coming, or someone was already there. And for the first time since the operation began, the KGB understood the truth. David Rimes wasn't just passing information. He was preparing an extraction, or facilitating one. Either possibility meant the CIA's plan was far bigger, far riskier, and far closer to succeeding than anyone in Lubyanka had expected. The real game was only beginning. The forest clearing lay silent beneath a thin veil of morning fog, the kind that wrapped itself around the branches like smoke from an invisible fire. Colonel Voronin stood behind a line of birch trees, his coat heavy with frost, listening to the distant hum of an approaching engine. The coordinates intercepted from David Rhymes's transmission had led the KGB here, to a forgotten patch of wilderness with no visible strategic value. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a place where hunters might gather or smugglers might pass through at night. But the KGB understood something the CIA had always underestimated. In espionage, the most unremarkable places often hide the gravest secrets. The sound grew louder. Rhymes' car rolled into the clearing, its headlights cutting wide arcs through the fog. He stepped out, calm, composed, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he simply stood there, listening to the stillness. Then he walked to the center of the clearing, removed a small metallic device from his pocket, and placed it on a tree stump. He wasn't meeting someone. He was waiting. Minutes passed. Then the air cracked with the distinct roar of a helicopter, low and fast. The KGB unit stiffened. Through the treetops, the dark shape of an unmarked helicopter pushed through the fog, circling once before descending. It had no insignia, no tail number visible in the morning haze, but every man watching knew exactly who it belonged to. The CIA wasn't planning an extraction. They were planning an infiltration. The helicopter touched down, sending leaves swirling in a frantic dance. A figure stepped out, tall, bundled in a heavy coat, moving with the certainty of someone who believed he was among allies. Rhymes approached him quickly. They exchanged no handshakes, no greetings, only a brief nod. Then Rhymes handed him a second device, identical to the first. The KGB had their proof. A deep cover operative was entering the Soviet Union, not leaving it. Voronin gave the signal. The forest erupted with movement. Agents surged from every direction, emerging from the fog like shadows turning solid. The CIA operative froze, eyes darting, hand moving instinctively toward his coat. But Rhymes grabbed his arm, stopping him. For a split second, the two men locked eyes, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Rhymes knew it was over. He raised his hands. The CIA operative didn't. He bolted toward the helicopter, a desperate sprint across the clearing. But the KGB had anticipated it. A single warning shot cracked through the trees. The operative stumbled, fell, and lay still, the fog swallowing his silhouette. The helicopter attempted to lift off, engines whining. But a KGB team detonated a pre-placed explosive charge beneath its tail rotor. Metal shrieked. The aircraft tipped violently and slammed onto its side. Disabled but intact enough to preserve its cargo for investigation, Rhymes was taken into custody without resistance. He didn't argue. He didn't deny. The calmness he had worn like armor finally cracked only once. When Voronin asked him a single question, why risk all of this? Why now? Rhymes' answer was quiet, almost resigned. Because your system is weaker than you think, and ours is more fragile than we admit. It was the closest thing to a confession Voronin would ever receive. Within days, the incident was buried under layers of classification in both Washington and Moscow. The United States claimed the helicopter malfunctioned during transit. The Soviet Union reported discovering foreign equipment during a routine border patrol. Publicly, nothing happened. Privately, everything changed. The KGB uncovered the CIA's plan to secretly insert a high-level operative who would coordinate a network of assets embedded deep within Soviet scientific institutions. Their goal wasn't sabotage, but acceleration to push emerging technologies in directions advantageous to the United States without the USSR. Realizing the manipulation, if the plan had succeeded, the balance of global power might have shifted quietly, invisibly, over the course of a decade. The KGB had stopped it, but not without cost. 2 agents died in the clearing. The helicopter explosion created diplomatic ripples that lasted years. And the interrogation of David Rhymes revealed something far more unsettling. He was only one of several. Others were waiting. Others were already here. In the cold corridors of Lubyanka, the victory felt hollow. The CIA's plan had been crushed, but the shadow war between the two nations had only grown darker, and the KGB understood that this operation was not the end, but the beginning of a much deeper game.